Good morning, everyone. My name is Anzara Miller, and I am the Director of Educational Leadership and Development for CSTEP, the Center for Strengthening the Teaching Profession. One of the things we do at CSTEP is to provide ongoing, responsive, and relevant training for educators based on current best practices. With that in mind, we're doing a series on student growth goals, best practices. In this series, we invite practitioners from across Washington state to highlight tools, practices, and strategies for implementing the student growth goals that are making a positive impact on both teachers and students. We will have resources and protocols on our website you can use for capturing notes and to support collaborative conversations about the presentations. Today, we'll hear from Shannon Lawson, Director of Leadership, Growth, and Support in the Spokane School District. Thanks for being here, Shannon.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to share the work we've done with you and anyone else who can benefit. I'm going to go ahead and launch into the presentation now. So let's get going. How's that look, Anzara?
It's still loading. There it is. It looks beautiful.
Perfect. So as Anzara mentioned, I'm the Director of Leadership, Growth, and Support. I'm also a framework specialist. And so I've been in the game quite a long time. And I am excited to share what we've done in Spokane Public Schools. The theme of our presentation today is creating a natural harvest. And the reason we've kind of landed on this as our work is we have been piloting for such a long time that we've learned a lot from our mistakes. So I'll take you on a pathway to our journey here. We started with some seeds in our harvest. We were one of the first pilot districts. We piloted within several schools, and then we piloted district-wide, all during the years of COVID and back and forth around when full implementation was going to be required. To set a context, we are the second largest district in the state of Washington. We have 58 schools. I serve all of the leaders in all of the schools. And part of the pilot was having to retool every school in terms of what student growth goals were and then what our crosswalk was to the new model. In 2022 to current, we've been in full implementation district-wide. And now that we've had these years of experience, our real focus is to shift from actually just knowing what the new model is to really integrating student growth goals into all of the work we're doing in terms of our district-wide focuses. And that work of knitting together is really essential in our quest to make this meaningful and manageable work for both administrators and for teachers. So that's kind of the theme of where we are now and how we've seen this natural harvest play out in such a large district. So to share with you some of the roots of our learning, since we've been doing it for so long, we've made every mistake you could potentially probably make. The biggest thing we've learned is that it just takes a lot more time than you would anticipate to unlearn the former model, both for teachers and administrators. I imagine that in smaller districts, it might take less time, but even with all the years we've been implementing, we still are continually having to help shift mindsets from what they used to think about student growth goals to the new model. In doing that, one of the essential things we needed to do was recalibrate the process overall. And so some of our administrators and teachers hadn't really had deep ongoing training since implementation back in 2010, depending on if we acquired them from another district or they missed out on the ongoing cycles of training. We just needed to kind of stop and get everyone back on board. So we have been working on that over the last 3 years. Teachers shared a desire for more feedback, and this process really has allowed them to gather that in a more authentic way. And for some administrators, that was a new learning. They really felt like they were doing teachers a favor by kind of making the process quick and easy, compliance-based. And what we heard from teachers is that's not what they wanted. And so that was a shift in mindset for administrators. And the other shift for administrators is that we had to get them out of that gotcha framework. because they were so focused on spreadsheets and data and percentages and high and clear evidence, they were really kind of taking a gotcha approach, even unintentionally. And so when we talk to them about it's really not about the data, you have all the data a teacher would need to share with you. What you need to be practicing is reflective conversation skills and how you're able to draw out what the teacher is going to do with that data and what the next steps are. And so they were just really comfortable in their colored spreadsheets. And we had to get them out of that and help remind them that no teacher is going to think based on student growth goals. Our goal is to support student learning. And that's where we needed to keep our conversations focused on. And then we really wanted to be clear about knitting the work of student growth goals with all other initiatives in order to be like have fidelity to the process, but also to keep maintain our status of this should be meaningful and manageable. So this is how we created our path forward, and this is where we are currently. So we have three areas of focus in our district. We want to build a sense of belonging for teachers, for students, and for our community. We want to focus on teacher clarity and coherence in instruction, and we want to utilize professional learning communities to be sure that we are hitting our growth targets with students. So the essential question that I try to present when I'm working with schools is how do we embed these three focus areas within the evaluation process by focusing on student growth goals to create this meaningful, manageable process? So the success criteria to do this is we started with linking the work of Dr. Yemi Stembridge with our targeted residency experiences. So schools that have been working with him are generally our schools that are underperforming or have a desire to create a deeper connection with culturally responsive education. And so we utilized and kind of leveraged that work with him in our student growth goal development and then how we work with educators in their planning process. The second success criteria is aligning our work with achievement teams, Steve Ventura's work and Dr. Tammy's work with Scholars First. Our administrators have been working with them over 3 years around teacher clarity and coherence. And then now we're crosswalking that with the instructional framework and student growth goals in a really intentional way. And then last, we want to utilize the professional learning communities as our vehicle to develop team building and individual student growth goals. And so this is really kind of the mechanism that we're able to create that manageable process while creating the meaningful connection of knitting these three things together. So basically, we really asked this question. What if student growth goals were the center of the evaluation process rather than an additional component? For all of the years we've been doing this, it always feels teachers are kind of thinking, well, I did my TPEP work, I've done my observations, and now you're telling me I have to have this professional growth plan and a student growth plan. This feels like a lot. And principals were getting to get all of the feedback and all of the scores entered. And then it was like, oh yeah, and now I need to do student growth goals. And so we kind of said, let's stop and think about this. What if we really focused on student growth goals and then built our evaluation process around that? And so this is how we created that concept. So we decided to really work with principals in thinking about how are you aligning your school improvement plan and department goals and grade level goals with teachers? And then how do you think about what is really meaningful? Where is that meaningful connection for students and for staff in that growth area? And where does that fall in a unit of study or a cycle of learning? Can you place your two observations with the teacher in that unit of study and then really go deep in those reflections? Alongside that unit of study, you would be working with your colleagues and with administrators in the PLC, sharing work samples, assessments, doing feedback, adjustment of the unit during the unit, and then the principal would really stay focused on supporting those teams during that time. And then the PLC would reflect on what worked. How do we know students learned? What did we do if they didn't? And then how are we going to create future learning opportunities? So the supervisor attends, reflects, and supports a team all the way through this unit of study in a very authentic and deep way. And because they have that connection, the conversation really unfolds throughout the process. It isn't like they're adding on a separate reflective student growth goal conversation. It's intertwined within. An example of this, hopefully this pops up for us, would look like this. So for 8.1, the PLC would develop and reflect with
And
the
we're not seeing what you've popped up.
okay. Um, I wonder if it won't let me share this part, but
Why don't
we
we
can.
finish and then we can look at those two documents?
Perfect. Then we can look at the documents.
Yeah.
So in the document, you'll see how it walks through what that would look like for 8.1, for 6.1, and 3.1. So regardless of a teacher, whatever a teacher's chosen for their student growth goal component, or if they are on comprehensive, you can see how it would unfold for all three levels. When we had this process in place and asked administrators to lead this work, we then asked them for feedback. And this was some of the feedback that we heard. They really felt like it does take effort to align their calendar with different groups working throughout their unit of study at different times through the year, but that time planning made the workload more manageable, and they were able to unfold the evaluation process throughout the school year instead of having this large workload in the late spring calendar. Many of them are like, why didn't we think about this before? This seems like something we would naturally be wanting to do. We heard that they're finally getting teams to be rowing in the same direction. So they're getting a lot of momentum by having teams pick with one criteria and move that forward. They felt like it's a valuable process, and they really feel like they're giving teachers the actual support they need. And then data discussions aren't artificial. They're very valuable and authentic within each unit of study. And the biggest thing we heard is that TPEP just takes care of itself with this model. It's embedded within the work the administrators were already doing. We then talked with teachers and said, how did this feel to you? And I picked teachers that are generally are resistors. So secondary fitness and health, some secondary math folks, some people who I already knew were having a hard time buying into the new model. And what we heard from them is that they really felt like this is why I became a teacher. I really am not making things up. I'm having real conversations about my practice with my colleagues. I feel like things are connected, and that student growth goals and evaluation is nothing that I need to be fearful of at this point. And so that was really validating to both administrators and us at the district level that this work is really meaningful for our staff. Where we still need to grow, and this is another document to look at, is we really needed to grow our administrators' muscle on giving reflective feedback. And so what we did is we took the work that we're doing with achievement teams and scholars first in that teacher clarity model. And then we looked at the most frequently scored criteria. We have the Marzano model. So we looked at criteria 1.1. That's our most frequently scored criteria. And we designed some conversation stems for principals in alignment with the work we're doing with achievement teams and scholars first. And then we also created a differentiated sentence STEM matrix where they could look at teachers who were just beginning in their practice, teachers who were right where we needed them to be, but wanting to move forward, and then that group of teachers who are rock solid and trying to stretch their skills. And so that document will be really helpful, and we are working on building them out for each of the 43 elements in our framework. We really also need to give principals more support on how to schedule a calendar around this model. They were really used to scheduling their two observations, the pre and post observations. They were really used to scheduling in how they might have student growth goal conversations at the end of the year. But in this model, when teachers are working in groups with different units of study at different times throughout the calendar, we needed to help principals kind of adjust to that. We also need to get that language into our contract so that teachers knew and could expect that they could have the opportunity to work on their student growth goals and TPEP in one unit of study, and that we needed to start much sooner than our current bargain had allowed for. So we were able to shift that in the cycle of our bargain. We really also need to gather administrators together in their own PLCs and have them share best practices of how they've been able to make this meaningful and manageable. For example, in several of our buildings, they've landed on the same criteria. So they're all working in different units, but around the same criteria. And then we needed to always continue to support administrators and teachers who need to unlearn the old model. Either they struggle to engage with us in the conversations as we've transitioned to this model, or we have inherited them from other systems that just were not as far along as we are. So that continuation is an ongoing process. And then we always need to strategically knit our initiatives together. So in all of our teaching and learning, as things are presenting as our new kind of ways of being or a new curriculum, then it's my work really to say, okay, how can we knit this together for administrators and teachers so that they see that this is all embedded within the process of teacher evaluation. It's not something additional. And the reason for that is we know that teaching is extraordinarily complex, but we also know it's possible and that we need vulnerability both from administrators and from teachers to really stretch and to grow so that our students are having the best, deepest, richest learning experiences and that we're being responsive to all of our students' needs. So we really take this quote and we think about, okay, this is extraordinarily challenging and it is possible if we can find ways to make it meaningful and manageable, and we look at the harvest that we have. So that's the work that we've been able to do in Spokane Public Schools. I think we've seen great benefits from it initially, and I am just super excited to see how else it's going to grow as we continue along the continuum.
Thanks so much, Shannon. I really like your essential question of what if the student growth goals were the center of the evaluation process instead of an additional component. And that's where I'm really seeing a lot of districts get some traction on, oh, this is all integrated. So
Mhm.
I appreciate you sharing that model. Can you pull up those documents that were linked in your slideshow just to show those real quick?
All right. Are you able to see this now?
Yes. Yep,
Okay.
I can see that.
So this is the graphic that was in the slide deck around how a student growth goal example might look in a team PLC model. So as you can see, the 8.1 would be the grade, department level, or some collaborative group that are working in PLC collaborations. They're sharing student outcomes, they're reflecting on their practice, they're developing and reviewing resources, and they're planning for their next steps. The administrator can be in that discussion with the PLC group, but then also in the classroom observations during that unit of study, and the scoring takes place right then. Then, if a teacher had selected 6.1, or if it's a comprehensive, the teacher would then determine, based on the students in front of them, what are their needs. And this is where we might utilize our universal design for learning aspects, workshop elements, things that are specific to the students that they're engaging with, and the assets of those students. It's also where we would see that feedback from parents and from students on what the teacher's doing. The teacher then reflects on the growth in these categories. We look at students who met or nearly met the target, and we talk about what is going to happen next based on that data. And these can happen specifically with the evaluator during those post observations during the student growth goal reflection. And then for 3.1, the teacher would further identify that group of students who are not yet reaching their full potential and what those modifications and adjustments would need to happen in that unit of study to support those students. This is also where we would see that direct family input around student goals. The teacher then reflects upon that group of students, what was personalized for each student by name. It can continue to happen just right within that post-observation and PLC discussion. And so all three of those elements can take place all within both the PLC reflections and the pre and post observation that the advisor or administrator is doing for that unit of study. The staff then can track progress, but everything else in terms of data would already be a natural harvest of what we would be looking at in terms of how we are utilizing student data for PLCs.
That's great. We'll have that a link to that document on our website so you can take a closer look at it, as well as this one.
So this is an example of our post-observation reflection guide for administrators. Again, we're Marzano, so this is 1.1, which is clear learning goals and rubrics. We're working with achievement teams around our clarity of success criteria. So when you look at this document, you can see that there is a section around the reflection of the opening of lesson and some principal prompts they could ask questions for and what the purpose of those questions would be. Then we go into clarity of learning goals and then communication of skills and success. So they're just straightforward prompts that can help guide that conversation for administrators. We look again at student ownership and feedback, and then the reflective closing of the lesson. The second part of this document are these conversations for feedback. And the goal here is to strengthen teacher clarity. So when we see strengths, we want to think about how can we affirm those strengths? What can we say to teachers so that they say, yeah, I'm making progress here? And then how can we encourage growth? What statements might we ask in our reflective conversation that would encourage growth with a wide range of teaching levels? And then the last column is that partnership language. How can we develop this idea of I'm walking alongside this with you. I want to support you in your planning. I want to support you in your goal setting. And so here's that partnership language. And we really revolve this around our three PLC questions, but thinking about it from the lens of a teacher. How do we know that a teacher is learning? How do we know they know it's important? And how do we know they've learned it? So these question stems have been really helpful to strengthen those conversations. And our experience is once you start with one or two questions, just like the OSPI reflective question stems, the teacher takes it from there. And the reality is, most administrators have said the hardest part about this is I can't get the teachers to stop talking and I need to go. So
That's
really,
great.
wow, if that's our biggest problem, that's a great problem to have.
Yeah.
So it's been really wonderful. I've had the opportunity to lean into some resistant groups with principals, and so it feels really good to see that they are able to make progress. But more importantly, the teachers really want feedback and they want to grow. And we have done them a disservice by thinking a spreadsheet is real feedback.
Thank you so much for sharing today. Like I said, the resources, a copy of the presentation, and those two documents will be on our website. Thank you all for joining us.
Yes, thank you. And feel free to reach out anytime.
Great.